Joining us for a little bit this morning is the State Commissioner of Administration, Mr. Jay Dardenne. Hey, Mr. Jay, how are you doing this morning? Thanks for taking time.
Good morning, Robert. Doing fine, thank you. How are y'all?
Good. Jay, the Appropriations Committee meeting, I was watching some of that testimony yesterday. The governor says this budget is not worth the paper it's printed on. You agree?
I do. It's very difficult to try and balance this budget with the shortfall that we have, but the bill that came out of the Appropriations Committee yesterday basically turns its back on our public hospitals and on health care, and it's just something we can't tolerate in this state. We'd be closing every public-private partnership hospital, including the one in Shreveport.
That's what I wanted to ask you about. The funding for University Health Hospital here, serious cuts, and it could be in jeopardy. Is it true?
Yes, it's true right now. In the bill that came out of the Appropriations Committee, there's not any money at all provided for the Shreveport Hospital. No general fund dollars whatsoever.
Wait a minute. How do they think that's even viable?
Well, it's not. I don't know. You'll have to ask them. You'll have to ask the people who voted for it in the Appropriations Committee, and I would hope that members of the House will not be voting for this budget the way it is. And let me just add, there's no real good way to fix this right now. The Appropriations Committee fully funded TOPS and did not fund the partner hospitals or really most of the Medicaid budget at all. But there's simply not enough money to go around to do everything that most people in the state would say we'd like to have done in Louisiana. That means funding higher ed at the level we funded it last year, funding TOPS, funding our sheriffs who keep state inmates in their local jails, and funding our hospitals and the rest of the Medicaid budget, which is greatly in jeopardy. We're talking about nursing homes having to send letters to patients telling them they're not going to have a place to stay in the nursing home anymore. And that sounds over dramatic, but it's not. It's the reality that we're facing given the budget crisis.
And yet the committee, the House committee, seems to have thrown a whole bunch of money to fund TOPS. What do you think the thinking behind that was?
Well, this is not something new. This happened a couple of years ago where there was an attempt to fully fund TOPS in the House, and the Senate changed that. I mean, we all want to fund TOPS. We want to fund TOPS fully as well, but to do that, we've got to raise some additional money. I mean, this should be no surprise to anybody. We've been talking about this for months, and the legislature has had multiple opportunities to raise the revenue to replace the temporary taxes that are going off the books on June 30th. And the legislature, the House, that is, has steadfastly refused to advance any bills to the Senate that would make up the difference. And that's the problem we're facing right now. We don't know what the revenue picture is going to look like. We know that the legislature has not raised any revenue in the past year and a half to try and deal with the cliff. The governor wants this session to end early so we can go into yet another special session, one that wouldn't cost taxpayers additional money because they would otherwise be here for the regular session, to try and fix this mess so that we're not continually going through this up and down and this incredible uncertainty that's being visited upon students who need TOPS, on residents of nursing homes, of people who are depending upon substance abuse treatment, for our partner hospitals. Every single hospital in the state that has a relationship with the state is not funded in this proposed budget.
So it's a question that I've asked before. If Mr. John Bell were getting from the special sessions what he wanted from the special sessions, he wouldn't have to keep calling special sessions. Given the fact that the political makeup, the party makeup of the state legislature hasn't changed, what could possibly be different about another special session?
Reality. The reality now setting in that this budget has got to be enacted by June 30th to begin the fiscal year that starts on July 1. And instead of pushing things down the road continuously, now is going to be the time to act, to say what it is you would cut in this budget. You know, the people who've been saying, let's cut the budget. Well, we saw what the Appropriations Committee did to cut the budget. They did not fund health care.
Jay, let me ask you this. I'm a little bit confused because they're working on a budget right now, but they can't raise taxes during the regular session. So
right.
We're working on a budget that won't have any new taxes in it, but it's got to be balanced. And then you're going to come back later and raise taxes, and then how's that going to work out?
And then will you put stuff back?
Yeah, fund stuff again?
Frankly, yeah. The most sensible thing to do, and this is my view, is to adjourn this session as quickly as possible, without a budget and go into the special session so that the budget and the revenue picture can be considered at the exact same time. We tried to consider the revenue picture first in the earlier special session, and that failed. And so now we've either got to enact a budget that does not fund an awful lot of things and then come back in a special session and raise the money to fund it, but the budget's got to be balanced, so that makes it very difficult to do, or we adjourn early and go into a special session where the governor can call the budget into that session and consider the budget and the revenue at the same time. That seems to me to make the most sense, and it's just going to be very difficult, I think, for both the House and the Senate to enact a budget that makes the kind of cuts that are going to be necessary no matter what, because we cannot fully fund health care and fund TOPS and fund higher education with the dollars that the Revenue Estimating Conference tells us are available right now. We've got to have some additional revenue to do that.
And so what different or the same priorities will the governor put into this special session as far as, in other words, is he still for an income tax? I know it's a dirty word, a Stelly type return, gas tax increase. What are the governor's priorities for raising the revenue?
Nothing's going to change from what was considered during that previous special session and what was considered last year. I think the general view is that any income tax change like Stelly is probably not going to happen, which means we've got to do things like change the sales tax exemptions and exclusions and credits so that they're all consistent on every penny that we have, make permanent some of the temporary taxes that expire on June 30th, and consider a portion of the 1 cent sales tax that expires on June 30th. Those are exactly the types of bills that were available during the special session that could not survive.
Jay, let me ask you.
They're going to come right back up again. We're not going to have a whole lot of new choices.
Let me ask you a moronic question. And there's people sitting listening that are probably thinking the same thing.
I'm already thinking that.
Why can't you and the governor look at every department head and say, cut your budget by 10%? We're in dire straits. Go back, cut your budget by 10%, bring it back to me. Why can't that be done?
Aaron, if we raise the money that the governor wants to see raised to balance the budget, we'll still be cutting over $100 million out of the budget. I mean, we have cut the budget since this governor has been in office. The budget has been reduced over the course of the past decade, really, to a large extent, and the budget's been balanced with one-time money, as we've talked about repeatedly. It's just much easier said than done. And by the way, 75+% of the budget is incorporated in the health care budget and education. And those are the things that we don't want to see cut. And every time we cut the general fund for health care, for hospitals, for substance abuse, for any type of treatment, we're losing a significant amount of federal dollars that are matched by that state general fund dollar. Already this budget is the way it is right now, we're going to lose almost $2 billion in federal money.
Jay, I'm looking at your general fund budget, though. 7.7 in 13-14, 8.1, 8.2, 8.9 last year. Now it's down 8.7. But our general fund budget's been climbing every year until this current year. That's where I'm a little confused.
The general fund budget has been relatively consistent for the past 10 years. And that general fund budget is what you and I pay in income tax and sales tax, the revenue that's generated within the state of Louisiana. It's been relatively constant. The health care general fund budget has actually gone down this year.
But our general fund budget was $6.9 billion in fiscal year 10-11. $6.9 billion. And now it's up to $8.7 billion. That's where I get off track. I'm like, how can we keep expanding by $2 billion and we're losing residents? We're struggling. That's my issue.
Aaron, they hadn't been raising taxes during that time period. I mean, that general fund budget has been very constant over those course of the last 10 years when you look at those numbers, and that's not because there's been a whole lot of taxes raised. The economy improved at some point. It went down with the national recession. We're struggling because of that, and we had this facade of a balanced budget for the past 8 years where we were simply raiding funds and using one-time money to balance our budget, and it was a fiction, and we're not doing that anymore. You don't have a nickel of one-time money to fund recurring expenses in this budget under this governor. You're not gonna. We're gonna tell the truth when it comes to budgeting and say we got to live with what we've got, but we've got to set our priorities, and we've got to replace revenue that was passed on a temporary basis.
If it's fair to assume,
you can't go backwards.
Sure.
If it's fair to assume that the Republicans in the legislature are representing the will, the wishes of their constituents, which is we don't want new taxes. We think we are giving enough of our money to the state of Louisiana. What is it about their stance, their conservative stance, their I want to hang on to my money stance that they don't get?
Because we're not raising taxes. We're trying to keep the level of taxation that has been in place as a result of the temporary taxes that the legislature voted on 2 years ago. When they did this and knew it was going to expire in June of 30, we knew we'd have $1 billion problem because they raised $1 billion in taxes. So what we're saying is replace not all the money that's rolling off. So replace enough to fund what we want, and that requires now it's going to require about another $600 million after the Revenue Estimate Conference recognized the 346 last week. But we're simply saying we've got to stay afloat with what we've got. We can't go backwards, or if we do, to those who don't want to vote to replace those taxes, you're going to have to tell the people what you want to cut. And the Appropriations Committee yesterday said we're comfortable cutting. I wouldn't say they're comfortable. I don't think that's fair, but they said they'd cut health care. And we can't see that happen in this state. That is just an incredibly irresponsible move to say that we're not going to have a hospital system in Louisiana.
So in your mind, in the governor's mind, that penny roll-off, when that tax ends the end of June, it is potentially that disastrous.
It is that disastrous. We're not making this up. And by the way, the two of you and I have been talking about this for a year and a half, and we're having the same discussion. And this is now coming to the point that the unfortunate, inevitable flashpoint that we knew we were going to reach if we didn't fix something, and it's now happening.
Jay, a constitutional convention, is that needed to change our tax structure overall?
Well, it's not needed if the legislature and the people would decide to do it on their own. There is increased interest, it seems, in that constitutional convention, but obviously it doesn't solve our immediate problem. If there is to be a constitutional convention and it's limited to tax matters, it's going to be a year or two more that it's going to take to get the determination of how to select the delegates, to elect the delegates, to have the convention, and then to have the people vote on whatever comes out of the convention. So that's not an immediate solution. Long term, it may be what's necessary to make the kind of changes that are needed. But the legislature, by 2/3 vote, can change the Constitution, and the people can then vote on it.